So, a very good afternoon to all of you present here. Hope all of you are doing good. So, we had started our discussion on the topic English in India, History, Evolution, and Features in our last lecture, which was lecture number 1 on this particular topic. And today we are going to take that lecture forward. So, you can see my details on the screen. You can see my YouTube channels, address wherein you can get certain audio books which you can refer to for preparation for Net Set English. Now it is a live lecture, so dear students, if you have anything to discuss, you can use the chat box for communication. And as I said, it is lecture 2. So lecture 1, all those who have kind of gone through it, you have seen it was an elaborate description of the historical context of as to how English in India originated. Because this chapter or this particular module is about English in India, its history and how it is in use and what is its future. So we started with a kind of tracking of the inception of this idea of English in India. How did it start and what were the main milestones in it? Today we will go ahead and discuss certain important works which are to be studied in this particular module for your NetSet examination. However, before that, we will be quickly going through the main ideas so that we can connect this with the idea which we are going to discuss today. So, the idea that introduction of English, it is mainly that it is for gold and for Orient Pearl. English came to India. And then when East India Company's charter was renewed in 1773 and the 43rd section of the Charter Act of 1813 got sanctioned, a sum of not less than 1 lakh of rupees annually was to be applied for what? For revival and improvement of literature and encouragement of the learned native. So the main idea was to develop the knowledge base of the people whom the English or the East India Company had conquered. And it is through this endeavor that English got introduced into the culture of this particular country where we are now. So the question that comes up was that what was termed as learned? Is it an idea about improvement of knowledge in the native literature? That is the language which was used in that particular country originally, in that particular colony originally, were they thinking of improving the quality of education of the literature from that particular language, or it was English literature in general? So this was the question. However, by acquisition of Western education, by studying native branches of knowledge, this ambivalence, that is this kind of being, questioning the fact that what exactly this Anglicist and Orientalist debate was regarding the spread of education. So what were they mainly aiming? Were they aiming to spread the education of the indigenous languages, literature of indigenous languages, or they were thinking of including English into the way of curriculum? So this was a kind of ambivalent question. However, as we know that the very structured idea of bringing in English into the history of the literature of that country came in with Macaulay's Minute, which was in 1935. So in his famous Minute 1935, Macaulay outlined the basic reason underlying the introduction of Western education. So with the introduction of Western education, it is that we started with the including English as a source or as a medium of dissemination of knowledge. So we must at present do our best to form a class, and the main idea was to create a class of people who would be the interpreters, who would interpret between whom? Between the British and the million whom we govern, that is the people who were being governed as a part of the colony. So a class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in tastes, in opinions, in morals and in intellect. So they would be Indian by birth. That is why the blood and color would be Indian. But English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. So, this is what was the main plan. So, in order to do this, presidency colleges were set up in Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay. So, through universities, through colleges, slowly they planned to spread the idea of teaching English. So, in Calcutta, the Hindu college was renamed as Presidency College, by which name we still know it. The next milestone was Wood's Educational Despatch of 1854. So it was drafted by Sir Charles Wood, President of Select Committee of the British House of Commons. The highlights of this dispatch were the setting up of schools and colleges, as well as introducing a system of grants in aid. So this part is important, grants in aid. And it was used for setting up of schools and colleges. So the main idea was to educate the people of that particular colony. So there was a two-tier system, a higher and a lower system. Now the English language is to be the medium of instruction in the higher branches, and the vernacular or the language which was spoken in that place would be in the lower. And this particular position or situation is there very much in India even now. And the higher education will give you a basis of national unity, a better knowledge of your country, self-government, government of India by the Indians in modified form, a participation in the general intellectual movement of the world and hereafter. So this was the main aim with which they started. Now, there was the next milestone, which is the Hunter Education Commission, which was appointed by Viceroy Lord Ripon with the goals of investigating complaints about non-implementation of Wood's Dispatch of 1854. So, what was the status of implementation of Wood's Dispatch of 1854? That was kind of investigated by Hunter Education Commission. The current status of elementary education in the British territories and suggesting ways to extend and improve it. The report of this commission, led by Sir William Wilson Hunter, was submitted in 1882. And the main recommendation which was made by the Hunter Commission is that it kind of resulted in the following changes, wherein preference was given to literate candidates for government jobs in the lower levels, along with expansion of primary schools in backward districts. So you can see that this is how we are tracing how English slowly and slowly got into the texture of Indian literature, which comes into form later on, but the roots are there over here. Since we will start our discussion with English literature today, Indian English literature, we are quickly going through these basic main ideas. We are not going into an elaborate discussion because the elaborate discussion has been done in the previous lecture already. So, the main idea was to prepare what? Literate candidates. So they gave importance to education, as we saw that the main idea was to educate the people of the colony. Now, the next milestone which we have kind of come across is Indian Universities Commission in 1902. So Lord Curzon kind of evinced keen interest for the development of education in British India. Soon after his arrival as Viceroy, he convened one educational conference at Shimla in 1901. And the main idea was to discuss the problems ranging from primary to university education. But it is a matter of great concern that not a single educated Indian was invited to attend that conference. So we have kind of, we see that the kind of bias is reflected here, wherein we are talking about the improvement of education system in India, but none of the Indian representatives were invited to attend the same. So, at his instance, the University Commission was appointed on January 27, 1902. Now, the purpose of the commission was formulated as to inquire, that is investigate and kind of find out the conditions and prospects of universities established in British India So you have seen that there is reference to presidencies, right? So what was the condition of the various universities which were established in British India, and to consider and report upon any proposals which have been or may be made for improving their constitution and working, and to recommend to the governor general in council such measures as may tend to elevate the standard of university teaching and to promote advancement of learning. So we see that the main idea is to improve the learning of the people who are there in their colonies, and the main idea is to create their representatives who could be the interpreters and who could help them to ease out their process of doing business in this country or in this particular or whichever colony they are in. So again, just like in the Shimla conference, Lord Curzon did not include any Indian representative in this commission. And this attitude in general actually kind of hurt the sentiments of Indians. In connection with the improvement in the administration and education of universities, the commission recommended the following. What are they? Reorganization of administration, systematic supervision of the affiliated colleges, imposition of more well-defined conditions of affiliation, substantial changes in curricula and in the methods of examination. Now, though some of the recommendations were implemented, even then there was much dissatisfaction in the field of higher education. So any kind of, you see any bill is passed, or you see, any kind of resolution is done, it's very difficult to implement it. For example, if you talk about the National Education Policy 2020, government is trying to implement that. However, there are various practical reasons for which it has not yet been possible to do the same. So this is what has been the case for any kind of ideas which have been kind of generated, and people have tried to implement them. So there was much dissatisfaction in the field of higher education. Well, there was a greater demand than before for higher education. It was increasingly realized that the desired results were not achieved. So exactly the result which was desired, that is not achieved. So though large number of students was passing the university examinations, yet the standards were very low, and that is what was the main idea of concern, because the standards were low. There was much unemployment, and naturally a feeling of frustration was generated from here. So there was a feeling of kind of frustration, because the desired effect of having very good quality learned people of that particular country was not possible. Then comes the Gokhale bill, wherein Gokhale was aware of the intervention of government, and he made further attempt to draw the attention of the people of India as well as in India towards the condition of education. So all these things on the broader scale is about education in general, right? So on 16th March of 1911, Gokhale presented a bill in the Legislative Council to make a stronger fight against the government. And the bill, however, was more liberal and humble than the resolutions placed before. And the main objective of the bill was to make primary education free and compulsory in a phased manner. So the bill was basically based on Compulsory Education Acts of England of 1870-1876. And the important clauses were that compulsory education during the primary stage, and then the idea was that the percentage of attendance should be fixed by the Governor General in Council, and it should be left to the discretion of local bodies whether to apply the act to certain areas under their jurisdiction or not. And they referred to a select committee of 15 members for examination. The bill was also sent to the state governments, the universities and the local education authorities for inviting opinion. And then it was taken up for discussion in Legislative Council on 17th March 1912. The bill was debated for 2 days, And Gokhale raised powerful arguments in support of the bill, but the government was not ready to accept the bill, and it was put to vote and was defeated by 35 votes to 13. So there was an appeal to bring out these changes, but it was not accepted and it was kind of defeated. And he says that he knew that the bill would not be accepted, but he says he will not be depressed, he will not feel bad, because the preliminary efforts that were required in England, were also difficult, right? So he was sure that this bill would come back again and again till on the stepping stones of the dead cells, a kind of measure was made to spread light of knowledge throughout the land. So it was defeated, but it was a heroic defeat. So it's an important milestone. And then the idea of the status of English according to Macaulay, idea of the stamp of authority. So it kind of bears a stamp of authority in the 1830s, wherein British could flaunt their influence and define on their authority the parameters suitable to India. Macaulay's famous Minute of 1835 is the case in point. So he says that I have no knowledge. This expression is very important. Take a note of it. Who is saying this? I have no knowledge of either Sanskrit or Arabic, but I have done what I could to form a correct estimate of their value. I have read translations of the most celebrated Arabic and Sanskrit works. I have conversed both here and at home with men distinguished by their proficiency in the Eastern tongues. I am quite ready to take the Oriental learning at the valuation of the Orientalists themselves. I never found one among them who could deny that this part, you have to pay attention. If it is quoted, who is saying it, from where it is taken, you should be able to say, a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. And then Edward Said puts forward his views, wherein he calls that the world, the text and the critic. That Macaulay was an ethnocentric opinion was ascertainable results. He was speaking from a position of power where he could translate his opinions into the decision to make an entire subcontinent of natives submit to studying in a language not their own. So he identifies how Macaulay made it a kind of compulsion for the people to learn in a language which was not their own. And which language are we talking about? English. So this in fact is what happened. In turn, this validated the culture to itself by providing a precedent and a case by which superiority and power are lodged both in rhetoric of belonging or being at home, so to speak, and in rhetoric of administration, the two become interchangeable. To him, celebrated Arabic and Sanskrit works do not contain what he calls Oriental learning. The European Orientalists, particularly those in 19th century, looked for knowledge and study, that field of investigation in which new findings led to further knowledge of trends in natural and social life. And then began the process of institutionalization of English studies in India, and we are discussing the phase 1, the main ideas of phase 1 only. So by the beginning of 19th century, Indian economy had become potentially, if not actually, subservient, because they had become a colony to British interests. So this was visible when more and more administrative powers started passing into the hands of the East India Company by proxy to the British regime. This period also characterized the enfeeblement of Indian interests, divided as they became in the absence of an unifying factor. On their side, the British basked in the glory of the resurgent economy back home and victory over Napoleon in the second decade. In India, thus the fight between an alien power and a politically weak and divided society was unequal one. Then comes the phase 2, which is kind of more important, because the momentous happening with which the second phase of English in India is linked was the famous revolt of Indian soldiers against the British in 1857, which is the Sepoy Mutiny. And It was an expression of discontent and anger against a power in the presence of whom the country felt helpless. So it was a kind of registering their non-acceptance of the foreign power. Without going into the causes of revolt, we can relate this event to the antagonism developed between a strong force in occupation and a country ridden with insurmountable problems of poverty. The British from 1857 onwards chose a course different from the one they had adopted earlier. Now, with the change in status, our society would be managed in the new context as a formation constituting subjects, and the general perception of English was also meanwhile altered with relation to India. With the second phase, there was more productive results in the area of literature. So, earlier one mainly inspired, that is phase one, inspired thinkers and reformers. And with increase in the knowledge of English, a large number of creative minds began to look at their counterparts in England as their role models and sought to emulate, that is, imitate their example. So many writers were actually following and imitating the English writers. And one interesting example is that of the novel written by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, which is Raj Mohan's wife. And it is an amalgam or mixture of Indian folktale and the English novel. Whereas the characters in the novel are typically Indian with shades of black and white, the descriptions of nature are the ornate style, draws much from the contemporary English writing of the day. The narrative also reveals a number of influences of the contemporary thought in England. English in India in this phase opened a window to Western learning and made available to the emergent middle class a number of perspectives, many of them radical and modern. At the same time, because new things were introduced in the education system, knowledge which was already there, it was there, but new Western influence could be felt, and they became, the kind of books based on rationality were introduced, and it was kind of reawakening a kind of Renaissance period in the kind of context in which we are seeing how English was introduced. So, it also put on the periphery those languages and dialects that had been forged by ordinary people struggling to evolve their own idioms and devices to articulate their specific experiences. It also clearly made hierarchies that put English on a pedestal and assigned an inferior position to things Indian, and the harm caused by English is perceivable at the sociological level where things occur subtly. With this came the third phase. The third phase of evolution in India reflects a sharp sense of the events unfolding in India. This phase brought out the inefficacy of foreign language, whatever the extent of patronage the language enjoyed. That is, the support from the crown, whatever be the support, even then it was the inefficacy, the insufficiency of a foreign language was highlighted. And a meaningful entity by adopting a course at once challenging and desirable. Now, in spite of being diverse in scope and interests, our society came to recognize around this time what could be termed seeds of commonness. And then there is reference to Indian national movement, which began towards the end of 19th century and culminated with independence of India in the year 1947. So there is a peculiar relationship, and peculiarly it's going against each other between the nationalistic upsurge in India and English, because they were against the use of English, right? So the role of a language or a number of languages play in what can be broadly called as the social life. As a result, there began a split, and the split was amongst the English knowing middle classes. To which party they were supporting, what was their main idea, that became important. So it was supposed to serve at the cost of resources, culture, identity, and dignity. And Macaulay's dream of creating a middle class in India that would fight English battles and act as a buffer between the administration and common masses took it appears a reverse turn, that is what he intended. Instead of that, it became the opposite in the nationalist phase in the society, because they were against the foreign language. And as a result, a split between the English knowing middle classes meant to emulate, follow, or imitate the behavior and values of the master segment, thus working to the detriment of the society. And this happened, but the reverse also raised its head deep into or within the psyche. So there was a conflict, there was a split between English knowing middle classes. And now we come to the discussion of Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru as to how they contributed to this situation. So, Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru are particularly educative in that they symbolize the needs of the time. Both, that is, Gandhi and Nehru, stood for the effort of the enlightened sections aimed at creating nationalist consciousness. The enlightened sections in India chose, in the case of the split, the issue of dignity in preference to the modernity of the kind the British represented as colonizers. And the enlightened sections in India had modernity and rationality as well as moral daring that would be envy of the thinkers and practitioners of the 18th century European Enlightenment. Both Gandhi and Nehru spoke and wrote English better than most Indians. However, they sent a different message across to people within the Congress as well as outside. And what did they do? They stressed that the language of the national movement was to be an Indian language, that is, a language that ordinary Indians could understand and speak. So we see that Gandhi and Nehru, they were speaking English very well, but for their national movement, they didn't want any foreign language. They wanted an Indian language which the ordinary Indians could understand and speak. And what about the efficacy of an Indian language at that time? So most of the Indian languages in the 19th century had a vocabulary rooted in medieval life and ethos. So most of them had vocabulary which was rooted in medieval life and ethos. Now we come to the next person we are discussing, which is Bankim Chandra. So a few of them had what we call a grammar of their own, that which recognized their structures and identified rules determining them. So we are talking about the Indian languages which were there. And yet we have the great example of Bankim Chandra deciding to write in Bengali soon after he had written Rajmohan's Wife in English. So we see that the first novel which was written by Bankim Chandra, which is Rajmohan's Wife, and it was written in English. However, soon what happened? They he realized, and they had as we saw that the national movement, they slowly tried to move away from English and wanted to give focus on Indian language. And since Bankim Chandra is from West Bengal, Bengal at that time, he was from the undivided Bengal. He took up Bengali as a language for writing further. So in English, Bankim Chandra was quite proficient. That is, he knew the language very well. But as a conscious decision, he thought of going back to the original language. If he continued in that language, there is no reason why he should not have used with good effect the cadences of speech in English. So if he would have continued with this language, then definitely he would have contributed in the field of Indian English literature quite seriously. Now, equally well, he would have been fluent and spontaneous in descriptive prose. But the language of his fiction had to be Bengali for the reasons cited above. So he knew English, he could use English, but as a conscious decision, he went on to use his mother tongue, which is Bengali. And the language of fiction he used is Bengali, mainly in order to do justice to the Indian languages. Next reference can be made of Prem Chand. So is an example in this series comes next. He was a truly radical example. Since unlike most other Indian writers of the time, he shuffled between many native languages and dialects, and finally settled down to writing in Hindi. So he could use various dialects and languages, and finally he settled down with what? He settled down with Hindi. His Hindi drew from the spoken word and was yet formal. So it was using spoken word, not some strange or some very sophisticated words, but he was using the normal spoken words. However, the usage was very formal. There is no denying that Premchand's linguistic resources with respect to Persian and Urdu were enormous. So his linguistic resources with reference to what? Persian and Urdu were huge. They were enormous. Now, his English also matched well with that of his contemporaries, most of whom felt more at ease in it than in their mother tongue. So, his English was also very good. However, Premchand's mother tongue was Awadhi, a dialect that had a greater claim on accessibility in North India than any other spoken language in the region, with the sole exception of Braj. Now, Indian writing, the main idea of that. So, a mass movement required a language capable of being understood and absorbed by the masses. And Hindi, Bengali, Odia, Gujarati, and Marathi were the ones meant to play the role of carrying the nationalist argument to the ordinary people. So, the role which they were to follow was to carry the nationalist argument to the ordinary people. And is that the reason why Indian writing in this period flourished as never before in different Indian languages? Is a question. So, if there is any renaissance of Indian writing, as we were saying, kind of rebirth, a kind of new flare of life into the scope of Indian writing in our history, it belongs to this phase of the national movement. So it belongs to this particular phase of national movement that there was a renaissance, that is a birth, a rebirth to the idea of Indian writing in English. Compare this writing in the Indian languages with that by Sri Aurobindo, Mulk Raj Anand, Raja Rao, or R.K. Narayan in English around the same period, and we notice that the substance of Indian life, its down to earth appeal, emblematized in the fiction of Tagore, Premchand, Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay, Nanak Singh, Sadat Hasan Manto, and many Gujarati or Marathi writers. Yes, so various Marathi and kind of Gujarati or Marathi writers of that age. And if we combine this with the sweep and wide appeal of giants in poetry such as Iqbal, Subramaniam Bharati, Faiz, and Nirala, and the picture gets complete. So this stage marks the heyday of India's languages and literatures that push the language of our colonial masters clearly to the margins. Then comes the introduction of English in India, which is the phase 4. The fourth stage, that of the post-independent India. So till now we were discussing as to what was the status of English till the stage wherein India was not free. Now we are discussing the fourth stage is the post-independent India, wherein post-colonial period also we refer to it as. So it's highly problematic with the process of efflorescence in Indian languages and literature getting reversed with the passage of time. The progress and growth of Indian languages and literatures slowed down considerably in this period. So progress and growth of Indian languages and literatures kind of slowed down in this period. Writing in Indian languages became increasingly distanced from the broader concerns of society as time passed. And in inverse proportion to this, English has been able to gain unprecedented popularity. So what happened? We see a kind of change wherein writing in Indian languages became distanced from the broader concerns of society, and in inverse proportion, it is English which has been able to gain unprecedented popularity. So this stage has also been witness to a great surge forward of English as a language, not just of communication, but also of creative endeavor. So English kind of grew as a language, not just for communication, but also for creativity or creative endeavor. As a medium of instruction at the present time, it has more or less totally replaced Indian languages at the college and university levels. So you can see how now we are using English for almost all the different purposes, and at the universities and colleges, the medium has been English. So, as we are discussing the situation of English in India in the present time, a kind of understanding of role of English today is important. So, commenting on the role of English today, the report of the UGC Curriculum Development for English, first workshop of the undergraduate committee, 9 to 11 December 1986, run by the Central Institute of English and Foreign Languages, reads as follows. So English is an important tool for the pursuit of studies at the undergraduate and postgraduate levels. It is important for the effective functioning in a variety of professional and vocational careers. It helps in the attainment of social equity and provides opportunities for better and fuller life. It promotes the national integration by performing the role of a link language. It is an important instrument for modernization and creation of intellectual and cultural awareness of the contemporary world. So this is how the UGC Curriculum Development for English first workshop of the Undergraduate Commission, 9 to 11 December 1986, stated. So once English was established and position consolidated by institutional support and state patronage, it gathered a momentum of its own, so that even during the nationalist struggle, its position remained unchallenged. So though it was questioned, though it was kind of highlighted that it is not our own language, yet in order to bridge the gap between a country wherein the different people from different corners were speaking different languages, there was a kind of surge of use of English in the post-independent period, that is the fourth phase. So the humanistic claims of institutionalized English could not, and in fact did not, need to be subverted. And so English continued to exist alongside Vande Mataram and Quit India. So though the nationalist struggle was not supporting English, even then, along with the nationalist struggle, Indian soil gave space to English to flourish. And that is how English kind of blossomed in the Indian soil. It is interesting to note that on the occasion of independence, both Nehru and Jinnah addressed their nations on both sides of the border. So once there was partition in India, then also in both sides of the border, Nehru and Jinnah, they were addressing their nations in English. When the majority of the subcontinent's populace, that is people, were rural based and unlikely to understand the language, even then the country leaders were speaking in English. And this is what shows the kind of status which English had already kind of gathered during this time. So Mahatma Gandhi believed that real education is impossible through a foreign medium. And at the time of independence, there was a move to adopt Hindi as the national language. So we see that Mahatma Gandhi was very, very strict on this, and he stated that we cannot have real education in a foreign language. And hence he wanted to move to adopt Hindi as the national language. However, the breed of Western educated bureaucrats and politicians, so the people of power, the people who had money, the people who were politically sound, pleaded for English to be given equal status temporarily. So these people, the well-to-do people, they were not really happy with Hindi. They wanted to give equal status to what? Equal status, at least temporarily, to what? To English. So it was English in India decided that English would continue to be the official language only till 1965. So this is what was decided. Till 1965, it would be the official language, English. But in 1965, the Indian government, in the face of bloodshed in Madras and elsewhere, had to give assurance that English would continue as a working language for official purposes. So the assurance had to be given specifically to the southern states, which opposed and continue to oppose the imposition of Hindi. So the southern states were not really happy with this kind of arrangement, and hence they were not happy with the imposition of Hindi. So because of them, English continued. So while there has been a demand for the continuance of English, there has been an equally strong demand for its abolition. So we see that the demand for English was there, and there was an equally strong demand for its abolition as well. So both imposition and abolition was there. In the media too, the influence of English has increased by the day. So in media as well, what has happened? The influence of English has increased. Elitism and English are inseparable. And there is a mushrooming of institutes teaching spoken and written English. If you just walk out of your home, you will see there are different hoardings wherein it's stated that you will be able to speak English, write English if you join some spoken English course run by any particular institute, because there is a lot of demand of this language, because it has become the official language wherein we need it for any kind of business, we need it for any kind of establishment if we want to continue. So this is the kind of future which English has holds. Though with NEP 2020, there has been again a kind of influence of teaching in the vernacular language and English in the primary language. So not written English, not just in metropolitan centers, but even in small towns. Privately managed, these institutes are money spinners. From the language of the colonial masters, ever since its beginning in the 19th century, English has been adopted by the Indian ruling class as their language. So English has been accepted as their language, and power and prestige have always been associated with this particular language. So we notice that a smartly dressed English-speaking individual is the role model of every youth in our country. So this is the kind of, status which English has been associated to. So the aristocracy, the kind of attitude which Macaulay had reflected in the minute is kind of carried over even now after so many years. Now we are going to discuss some important Indian English works. And the first work which we are going to take up is drama, which is Hayavadana by Girish Karnad. So Girish Karnad was born to a Brahmin family and from an early age took an interest in traveling theatre troupes. So right from his early age, what was there? He was kind of interested in traveling theatre troupes. He majored in mathematics and statistics at Karnataka Arts College, graduating in 1958. After graduating, he traveled to England and studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, where he wrote his first play, Yati. Now, after working for the Oxford University Press for 7 years, he began to write full-time for both theatre and film. So he took up this activity of writing both for theatre and for film. For 4 decades, he has continued to write plays, often using history and mythology to address contemporary themes. So for 4 decades, he has continued to write what? To write plays, often using history and mythology to address contemporary themes. For his contributions to theatre, he was awarded the Padma Shri, one of India's top civilian honors in 1974. In 1992, the Indian government, what happened, actually awarded him, and he was awarded with the Padma Bhushan, another of its highest honors for his contribution to the arts. He also received the Gyanpith Award, India's highest literary honor, in 1999. So, his contribution is immense in the history of English literature. English literature originating from India as a kind of pathbreaker, as a model, as a role model for the upcoming generations. His contribution cannot be kind of sidelined. And now for the initial discussion, we are taking up one of his texts. Later on, we will go on to certain other contributions as well. So in 1947, when Karnad was a young boy, India gained independence from colonial rule under Britain. Under colonial British rule, theatre in India largely consisted of performances of Shakespeare. Because we can understand that Shakespeare is the most prominent kind of dramatist, and his plays kind of is the ultimate idea of how English play should look like. So under colonial British rule, theatre in India was also largely consisted of performances of Shakespeare. Now, in an attempt to decolonize the theatre, and this term is very interesting, that the domain of theatre, which was colonized, that is, which was kind of occupied, which was conquered by the performances of Shakespeare, he felt that there was a need to decolonize. And many other Indian playwrights also felt the same, that there was a need to decolonize, that is, kind of reclaim that space for Indian voices. So, decolonize the theatre. Many Indian playwrights and directors turned to religious rituals, classical dance and song, martial arts, and Sanskrit aesthetics in order to create a modern Indian theatre. So, his contribution to the modern Indian theatre, to kind of give shape to the idea of modern Indian theatre, is remarkable. And this particular text is definitely a contribution to this. So this was later dubbed the Theatre of Roots movement. And Karnad's work shares in this movement's goal, but also draws from some Western styles like Greek theatre through the use of choruses and masks. So you must be aware of the term chorus, wherein a group of people kind of gives you idea of what is going on in the play, and using the masks in the particular play. So these ideas are kind of borrowed from what? Borrowed from the Greek theatre, and these ideas were there in his works as well. So the Theatre of Roots movement became strongest in the 1960s and 70s, just as Karnad began to write plays. So Hayavadana, which is meaning horse face, is a 1971 Indian Kannada language 2-act play written by Girish Karnad. The plot is based on Kathasarit Sagara and Thomas Mann's retelling of transposed heads. And there is a twin play of it, which is Nagamandala. So Hayavadana presents the story of two friends, that is Devdatta and Kapila, and their love interest, who is Padmini. So who were the characters? When was it published? What is the main idea in it? You need to know about it so that you can kind of have an idea of the main story and the context, which we just discussed, the context of it and the main characters of it, the twin play of it, and when was it published, what is the other meaning of it, what were the names of the characters in it, and what was the plot mainly like. Then comes Vijay Tendulkar's Mitrachi Goshta, wherein he is, Tendulkar was always shocked, has always shocked society with his controversial themes and stark commentary on current burning issue. His works cover the strong ethical concern. So ethics, values, morals, ethical concern of exploring and critiquing the relations of power in their entire complex ramification is kind of reflected in his works, and this particular work is no exception. So Mitrachi Goshta, or a friend's story, as you can get it if you translate it, is written on an experimental topic, and it also criticizes this relation of power along with the complex struggle to achieve the dominant position. So, the different power blocks keeping on changing their strategies to achieve what they want. His works have generally awakened people of their long sleep. So, usually, what happens, one of the important roles of a good piece of literature is to awaken people from the conditioning to which they are already a part of. So, many things keep on happening around us, and we just take it lightly. We feel that, okay, this is how things run. But it is the contribution of important works like the ones which we are discussing now, which actually awaken people, which make them aware of the needs of the time and how we need to question and overturn the things which have been accepted so long as the norm. So the publication of his Mitrachi Goshta friend story also brought a turning point in Indian theatres, as they shocked the sensibility of the conventional audience by projecting the realities of life, human relationships, and existence. So, he was actually kind of this is what it kind of deals with. So the play depicted the tension between individual identity and social existence. So though he remains a detached observer and exposed the vices and weaknesses of the society and individuals, he has some compassion for the victim of circumstances. He is an individualist and presents individual versus society. So the identity and individual identity and their idea, that is reflected, and what comes across as, when two ideas come together, that is reflected. So he stands for the individual freedom, and his Mitra is also working hard for it. So the play deals with a bold theme of lesbianism, and people got surprised to witness a lesbian on stage that left her to flow with the stream and rebel against society. So it was beyond its time, taking up very strong issues when things were not taken up earlier. So the action of the play moves around the central character of Sumitra Dev, that is Mitra in the play, and Mitra is a carefree girl with loud laughter and dares to see directly into her eyes. She is quite careless of social norms and moral values, but got trapped by society with its norms to dominate. So the theme in itself is something which was kind of beyond its time. The way it was taken up, it was beyond its time. And the way it made the audience think was also something which kind of was very, very interesting. So Vijay Tendulkar was one of India's most influential and renowned playwrights of the 20th century, particularly in the Marathi language. Tendulkar was born on January 6th, 1928 into a Brahmin family in Kolhapur, Maharashtra. So he left school at age of 14 because he was involved in Gandhi's anti-British Quit India movement. He read voraciously, so he was a very good and avid reader, attended numerous theatre performances, and began writing for newspapers. In early 1970s, he turned to cinema, writing screenplays in what became India's new wave cinema movement. Tendulkar said of his love of writing that, "Give me a piece of paper, my paper and a pen, and I shall write as naturally as the bird flies or a fish swims." So for the last 50 years, I have been writing at roadside restaurants, on a crowded local trains. I have written on the sickbed in the hospital in spite of the doctor's advice. It was a relief. It was a joy. So we see that we discussed two of the important works and two of the writers who have contributed immensely to English in India and how their contribution is important. Now we will be talking about Narayan and his Malgudi days. It's an important work and it needs a kind of season discussion on it. So since the next lecture is about to begin now and we don't have time, I will be wrapping it up for today here. So any questions you can write in the chat box. If not, thank you so much all of you for joining in. Have a great day. See you in the next session.